It'll take, for the average person, it'll take 9 years off their measured age. It'll make you 9 years younger. So does $25,000 buying you 9 years? Sure looks like that. But for some people, they get a lot more than 9 years.
9 years.
One
What is
injection.
the hard evidence behind that? Are you afraid of death?
Ha. No, I'm not afraid of death. And it's a really good point that some in the longevity community, especially if you go back 20 years, there are people who just are terrified of dying. I decided sometime around 2004 when I made a point of traveling to the Andes, the Himalayas, learning meditation from the masters in different lineages, studied yoga and breath work and all that. The only rational thing you can believe is that there's a reincarnation. And the reason for that is whether or not you have seen evidence of that or not. If you're wrong, you won't know it, but you'll live a better life because you're just not worried about dying. Fear of death makes you not do all sorts of things that are really beautiful and fun and worth it, right? You're not going to lose, fear of falling off a cliff or being eaten by a tiger. That's built into your meat. You can't avoid that. But the rest of the fear, like, if I really screw up, I'll be back again. It's just a relaxing belief. And maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong. Doesn't really matter. If you're right, you'll live a better life and then come back more enriched. And if you're wrong, you'll live a better life and then not come back. So I choose to believe in reincarnation because it's the only rational belief to have in order to maximally live the life you have.
What was it that, or what reaffirms that belief in you then? Where did that come from, and what makes you so sure?
Well, I decided it was the only rational belief because of just the path I went down. All other beliefs pretty much minimize the quality of your life. But I've done a lot of esoteric spiritual training. I've done shamanic initiatory training. I sought out a jungle shaman in 1999 to try ayahuasca in Peru. And when I went there, they heard what I asked for and they said, "You're white." And I said, "Yeah, I noticed." They said, "It's only for local people. Like, why would you want to do it? You'll throw up. It's intense." And I said, "Yeah, I know. That's what I'm here for. I've done my work." I've also done breath work where I've seen past lives with lots of other data points that seem to support them. And during my neuroscience work at 40 years of Zen without any drugs, just from going into really deep meditation states, well, there's a certain thing that happens when you stumble across memories from other times. And it's something that's written about in lots of books about this. It's when you're in a really altered state and you look down and you see feet, but they're not your feet. And you look up and you're, wait, hold on. Why am I thinking in a different language? Why is this a different landscape? And you just realize, something just flashed in. And so I've just had plenty of things that I cannot explain in other ways. But even if none of those happened, it doesn't matter. The only rational choice is to say, I'm going to assume that I get a do-over so I won't just walk around in a state of fear all the time.
If you are so sure that you will come back in another life, why are you so set on prolonging this one?
That is also a good point. The reason that I want to prolong this one is because I want to see if I can, because I'm curious to see what's going to happen over a longer time frame. And also there's a more societal point to this. Right now, our reproduction rate across all of Europe and North America and a lot of the developed world, it is far lower than our replacement rate. So if we don't make ourselves have more energy and live longer, in 25 years, we will have empty cities because there are not enough babies becoming adults to fill up the cities anymore. We have a population crash imminent. And people could say, you're an alarmist. No, look at the data. We know the birth rate. We know the replacement rate. The birth rate is half of replacement rate. So 20 years from now, where will our young adults be? There won't be as many of them, right? So this is already happening. So you might as well say, well, 20 years from now, I might as well have the energy of a 30-year-old and be perfectly happy and have the energy of someone who's decades older sorry, have the wisdom of someone who's decades older and the energy of a young person and continue being productive and being of service to others and growing and evolving. I have no issue with when I'm done, I'm done. I'm famous for saying, look, I'm going to live to at least 180. The real answer is I want to die at a time and by a method of my choice. That's all I'm asking for.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the big sort of debate points around longevity and aiming for these these big ages is that okay, you might be able to make it to that age, but that's going to be a poor quality of life. How will you strike that balance?
That's just because people believe that aging equals weakness. So if you're going to live to 180, you're going to have to overcome weakness or you won't live that long anyway. So the deal is, I want to look and feel as good or better than I do now when I'm 180. And I'd like to say, I'm done. I think I'll die tomorrow. Sounds like a good way to do it. It's a lot different than 20 years of cognitive decline in a hospital. It's very, very different.
So if you got to the point where you were satisfied enough to make that decision, what would the success metric be to trigger that?
I don't think I'd be very quantitative about that. That would probably be very egocentric. It's just a feeling. When you're done, you're done.
Hmm. What excites you more about longevity research? Is it the sort of short-term results and the personalized results that you'll see in your life, or the knock-on effect in that the research you're putting out there and the research all the guys are putting out there will the benefit that will have to a future population? What excites you more, your experience or what you could impact on the world then?
It's a third thing. What excites me most is when someone who's 19 years old, like I was, and obese with arthritis and prediabetes and brain fog and high risk of stroke and heart attack, when they use my work and then 6 months later, they're at a healthy weight, their brain works again, they're calm, they're happy, they're actually able to show up the way they want. If someone would have just shared all this stuff with me at that age, it would have saved me $1 million and years of real suffering. It was unnecessary. So what turns me on the most is when someone who's in their late teens, early 20s is like, I'm just going to become a biohacker. And they avoid all of the crap that is almost inevitably going to come their way. And that gives them like almost a second life during their lifetime here when they're like, wow, I've got so much energy. I can do what I dreamed of doing. They can have healthier relationships. They can have marriages that last. They can start companies. They can discover new things. But if you're tired all the time, you're anxious all the time, you're in pain all the time, none of that stuff works. So I just think it's going to have a societal impact during my life. And it's not on older people, although it'll help them greatly. It's on younger people because they don't have to get old. It's much more expensive and difficult to reverse your age than it is to just not age in the first place. So if you're listening to this and you're 25 years old, and you have such an unfair advantage because you get to benefit from all the longevity stuff and do it so you don't have to get old. I learned longevity when I was in my 20s from people in their 80s who were reversing their age. They mentored me. That's how I became the biohacker I am today. And I remember my friend Mike was 88, and he would call me at 11:30 at night, just full of ideas and all enthusiastic. And I was like, he has more energy than I do, and I'm 26 years old. Like, how does this even happen? How does that work? And it really inspired me. Like, wow, if he can do it, there's no reason I can't do it. So I'm blessed that I had people mentoring me when I was young. And I like to see a world where there's lots of people with lots of wisdom and lots of energy, totally happy to help younger people, and where the knowledge is out there. So you don't have to just wonder why you feel like crap, or why your skin is breaking out, or why you can't pay attention in class or whatever. You just know. I'm building the AI tools to make it super easy. Most people don't have the time to listen to 1,200 episodes of my show, read the 8 books I've written, or the 3,000 long form blog posts to become a biohacker. It's like 2 years of college. But if I have a tool out there for you that says, just tell me what to do. And I ask you a few things about yourself, and I tell you exactly, here's what to do that's free, here's what's cheap, and here's what's expensive, and here's why they'll work and what they'll do, and here's how you can measure it. I'm right on the edge of launching that for you. And talk about a time saver and a money saver, but it's a life saver because you get more life for your entire life.
Well, it's clear that you're really passionate about this, and so let's dive into the sort of the mind of Dave Asprey then, because before you became known being associated with longevity, you had a super successful career anyway. I mean, it says on your website that you were the first ever person to sell a product online.
Yeah.
So you certainly had a lot going for you before you jumped into this field. There must have been something pretty big that you felt personally or happened to you personally for you to devote so much time now to this and sort of switch lanes.
Well, I mentioned that I started working with these people 3 times my age in my 20s. Yeah, I was interested in making my brain work and in not having pain and not being fat and being tired all the time. But I got such brain fog that I felt like I was in a car and I had the accelerator pressed to the floor and I was slowing down. And you can press harder, but there's nowhere else to press it. So there's this helpless feeling. You're like, man, I got nothing left. And it was happening every single day. And my career is taking off. It was so bad that I bought disability insurance when I was 26. I'm like, something's wrong. I don't I don't know what it is. My lab tests are fine. Doctors say I'm fine, but I'm not. I'm 50 pounds overweight at that time, and things aren't working. And so I just became curious. I said, I'm a computer hacker. Like I teach people how to build complex systems with parts you don't even control. We know how to take over a system where we don't know what's inside. How hard could it be to hack the human body? So I'd come home from my work at the company that held Google's first servers when it was 2 guys and 2 computers. And I would read PubMed and I became an expert in mitochondrial biology. Why? Because I figured that mitochondria made my energy, so I wanted more of those. And it turns out I was right. I had massive mitochondrial dysfunction. So eventually I learned how to hack all these things, but it was really out of enlightened self-interest more than anything else.
Now, I mentioned the success you had, and this is something that I think a lot of people theorize, or maybe this comes from a cynical place, but a lot of people would point to some of the big names in the longevity space and say these are all very successful guys, they had a lot of money. Is it the fact that they are now just bored? They're rich, that they need something that money can't buy. And so they've almost gamified this approach now to focusing on the one thing money can't buy, and that's time.
I would challenge your assumption that money can't buy time.
Okay.
Do you have an assistant?
No, not right now.
Well, money can buy an assistant will buy you a lot of time.
Hmm.
I would also tell you that if you have $25,000, you can get an injection, a type of gene therapy that I've had. It'll take, for the average person, it'll take 9 years off their measured age. It'll make you 9 years younger. So does $25,000 buying you 9 years? Sure looks like that. But for some people, they get a lot more than 9 years.
9 years.
One
What is
injection.
the hard evidence behind that?
There is the idea of an aging clock. This is thousands of scientists collaborating over the last 10 years to figure out how do we know whether someone's older or younger. And they look at between 600,000 and 800,000 markers of DNA methylation in your cells. It's called your DNA methylation aging. And that's scientifically validated. And that can show you whether something's working or not. So I'm aging today at 72% the rate of average humans because I've been in the longevity field for a long time and because I wrote a major book on it, and the stuff that I wrote about largely works. And I guarantee you some of the things in my book are probably wrong, but they're way more right than wrong because my numbers show it, and so do the people who follow me.
What is the when you think about all the people that followed your protocols, read your books, the testimonies you've received, what is one that sticks out in your mind as a tangible example you can point to say, well, I know this works because this happened?
Well, I had a guy reach out probably about 2 years after I first published the Bulletproof Diet. He said, Dave, will you work with me? I'm going to do this perfectly. I've got a lot of weight to lose. And he lost a pound a day for 75 days. That was cool.
Hmm.
And another time early on when I first started the Bulletproof thing, I had a family walk up to me. I think it was at the second annual biohacking conference. So that would have been, I think, 2014. And they had a card with a photo on the front signed by all the family members. And they're standing there in front of me. And they said, look at that. And there was a 16-year-old on the card, super pudgy, acne everywhere, clearly unhealthy. I said, David, we took this picture 3 months ago. And standing in front of me was that same teenager with glowing skin and a healthy weight. And it actually, and they brought me actually frozen grass-fed steaks as a gift. But it actually brought tears to my eyes because, man, I was a really fat 16-year-old with bad skin. And it took me years and years and years. And to just see the vibrancy turn on, it's not that hard when you know what to do. It's really hard when you have a universe of options and all of them sound like they might work. So those are anecdotal points. I also have the results from thousands of people who've come through Upgrade Labs where we clinically measure a whole bunch of health markers, right? And we watch them change over the course of weeks or months. The science is there for longevity. And some things work really quickly, and some things work really slowly, and some things that we believe work just don't work.
We mentioned money. You mentioned that $25,000 injection, about the ability to maybe buy time. So, for people out there listening and watching right now, and they think to themselves, well, I don't have a lot of disposable income. Can I still achieve results? Maybe not to the extent that Dave Asprey can achieve them, but can I still achieve something worthwhile? I'm poor.
Every one of my books, when I talk about something that matters, here's a principle to understand. And the first thing is here's what you can do for free to take advantage of the principle. The second thing is here's what you can do for cheap. So maybe the free thing is free. The cheap thing is a supplement or a $300 piece of technology or something. And then here's what the crazy billionaires do. That is the largest expression of evidence that this pathway works or that this approach works. And I go out and I try all the crazy billionaire stuff because that's what I do when I'm writing books. And because I interview the people who create the technologies so that we understand they exist. What's going on in the field of longevity is actually the Robin Hood effect. Really, really rich people are paying for $25,000 gene therapy, which funds all the research for the next 9 targets. I know I'm advising the company called MiniCircle that creates that technology. So the next 9 targets for longevity are being funded by wealthy people paying a lot.
Hmm.
And as time goes on, the cost goes down and down and down. And when I was 22, there were conversations with people saying, cell phones are only for rich people. Look at these jerks driving down the freeway in LA with this giant cell phone stuck to the side of their head. Who do they think they are? It's $40,000 for a cell phone. And it's $20 a minute. Like that's only for rich people. They're $1 a month in Africa now. So of course, the newest technologies are going to be crazy expensive. That's how they become available for all of us. It was the same way with cars. It was the same way with everything.
If the science on this is there to see, if this is all backed by numbers and that we have tangible evidence to look at, where do you think the cynics and the criticisms and the critics come from? Because there are a lot of people out there, a lot of academics, a lot of science communicators who spend a lot of time trying to or debunking longevity protocols. Where do you think that comes from? Is that cynicism? Is that jealousy? Or is there credibility to it? Where do you think that mindset comes from then?
If you are cynical studies show that you die on average 4 years faster than people who are not cynical. So being skeptical or cynical is the same as being religious. If you're someone who believes that things always work, you're no better than someone who believes things never work. Maybe being non-biased and curious and looking at the evidence before making up the conclusion would be a healthy approach. I have on my Instagram some quotes and some audio from famous people. JP Morgan's banker, 1 year before we flew our first airplane at Kitty Hawk, saying, "Man will never fly." We have Albert Einstein saying, "We will never harness the power of the atom to make energy," 5 years before we did. So we have brilliant people and we have people who maybe weren't so brilliant. And there's about 5 other quotes, including Peter Attia saying, "We will never extend human life," while calling himself a longevity doctor, which I think is humorous. So there are people out there who are afraid. There are people out there who are full of ego. And the reality is, we have dozens of interventions that meaningfully extend life in mammals. And I write about them, specifically what they are and what to do, in my book, Superhuman, with references to the studies. And if there's something out there that can extend the life of rats by 92%, are you going to tell me that it's impossible for humans to extend their life at all? It's actually laughable on its face. What, are we so special that the things that work for every other kind of animal don't work for us because we're special? That is not scientific. Could you say, there's a lot we don't know? Every longevity expert that I know and trust is going to say, of course there's a lot we don't know. That's why we're scientists. We're cracking that code.
When you look at almost any scientific paper out there, they normally all end by saying more research needs to be done on this before we can call this a credible theory. Are you against that mindset then?
Well, yeah, there's a reason for that. You say more research is needed because you need funding for your more research. And if you don't say it, someone might threaten your academic tenure.
Okay.
Right? If you were to say, you know what, there's enough evidence, we can just say this is real, then your other colleagues will pounce on you. Right? And it's one of those things where, the squeakiest nail gets pounded kind of a vibe. And that's breaking down in academia. And I remember I had this conversation once with Craig Venter, the guy who created the Human Genome Project, the first man to have his DNA sequenced. And I said, Craig, you've got 20 years of data. You spent, billions of dollars. Can you give me one actionable piece of advice that I could share with people? Or should we all just have pizza and beer and wait because more research is needed? And he thought about it and he said, let's talk about it over pizza and beer. Now, academics are fearful of making a conclusion that might be wrong because it could be career ending. But let's think about it like this. You're walking down a road and there's 3 forks or three choices at a fork in the road. You have no evidence of any of them. Just pick the one that's easiest. But if you have one data point, just a tiny little data point that says one of them is better than the other, should you probably go down that road even if you're not sure? Well, of course you should. So correcting your course as more knowledge comes into what we know as humans is the only rational approach. Academics, though, are interested in being certain, and they don't want you to take action until they're certain because they could get blamed. And what I'm telling you is I will continue to evolve and change my practices based on my data, my own results, and based on what we learned as a species. But here's the kicker. Today, we double our knowledge of biology every 72 days, and the rate of doubling is increasing. So I cannot read all the papers on biology that come out. No human can. Fortunately, we have AI systems that can do that. So if our rate of knowledge is doubling every 72 days, and next time it'll probably double in 60 days, and then 40 days, and then 20 days, and pretty soon, we just know so much. Should we just ignore all of that because more research is needed? What we have here is just a case of perfectionism. You don't have to be perfect. Pick the most likely outcome. Pick the path that seems like it has the most evidence. And if the evidence is wrong, change paths. Otherwise, you're paralyzed because you're worried about perfectionism. And yes, more research is needed. Please send me your money.
I there's someone I know well who's been on this podcast. His name is Dr. Andrew Steele. Now um he's written a book on longevity. He's an academic, so he's open to these conversations, but very skeptical of the topic as well. And he's had a few exchanges on Twitter and ended up getting blocked by Bryan Johnson through one of these conversations. But whilst I think it's important for there to be guys out there like yourself who check and challenge these academics, would you also concede that there is a need from the academics to check and challenge people like yourself?
There are plenty of people who check and challenge me. And what's interesting is I was on stage live this morning with a professor of basically mitochondrial biology at UC San Diego, who is going to be at my biohacking conference in a little while. And we meet and we talk about mitochondrial biology and I ask him questions. I interview these people twice a week, and I have for more than 10 years on my podcast. I know a lot of them. And if I'm wrong, they're going to tell me that I'm wrong because they know I'm not going to get triggered. I'm going to be curious, right? And I'm happy to stand corrected. What I typically get is there's usually a small number of angry academics who were bullied in sixth grade who grew up to be adult bullies. And there's probably not really a conversation to be had there, but the vast majority of longevity scientists are curious, and we just have the best conversations over a meal, asking questions. Well, what about the role of pregnenolone in this? And have you thought about this? And it's like play, it's curiosity, and it's a shared learning experience. And so someone who hasn't even read one of my books says, I'm going to take Dave Asprey down. I saw this one video. My normal response is, could you at least do me the courtesy of looking at a few of the references in my book before we have the conversation? There was a time a while ago when Joe Rogan decided he was going to take me down because he was an investor in a company that was copying my work. It was a very financially motivated thing. And I was on a show 3 times, and I have hundreds of recordings of Joe saying how much my work affected him in a positive way until there was money to be made. And so I got the haters from that. None of them were academics. And there's probably a few academics out there who are mad. But I lectured the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine to 3,000 doctors. And 20% of them are like, how dare you? You're not a doctor. And the rest of them are saying, thanks for making longevity cool. Like, it's really neat to know you know something about red light and biology. Thanks for sharing that. I didn't know it, or I already knew that. It wasn't very helpful, but thanks. You're not going to please everyone all the time. It's not my job. I just want to help people who are not scientists figure out the most likely choices with the least possible money and time and suffering that's going to make them healthier and longer lived. And I'm totally happy to be wrong, but directionally, I'm right. And if any academic wants to have a conversation about it, say, I don't believe you on this front, then we start comparing notes. And one of the notes that I'm going to ask the academic is, could we like run a cell health analysis from Upgrade Labs on you? Because you look like you're full of visceral fat and you don't look very healthy. What's your muscle mass? What's your bone density? What's your visceral fat level? What's your liver fat level? And I think I'm doing really well because I'm 6% body fat and my numbers are great. In fact, I have the same rate of aging as Bryan Johnson, and I eat a very different diet that's evolved over time. I used to grind up veggies all the time. I just, over time, toxins build up from that. So, like, show me your numbers.
No, I appreciate and I respect the mindset. So here's an interesting question because you're, as you mentioned, you're in this space. You talk to these guys. You have conversations with a lot of these guys. When I look in at the longevity space, there are so many big personalities. There are so many people touting their information, or as we mentioned, trying to take each other down. From your unbiased, honest opinion within the longevity space, who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys?
I'm not in the habit of playing takedown debunking games because it doesn't help anyone like that. The good guys are usually the people working in labs or building companies who have 15 plus years of deep knowledge in a space where they've really become almost, let's just say, masters of that specific pathway or that part of a cell or that part of an organ. And they're curious and they read all the papers and they're excited. And I do my best to find those unknown people and I put them on my podcast to talk about the stuff they're doing that no one's heard of. That's like the most exciting thing in the world to them. And that ought to be exciting to the rest of us. One of them is, I call him Dr. Nicotine from Vanderbilt University. I believe is Andrew Newhouse. And he wrote the first paper in 1986 that showed that pharmaceutically extracted nicotine, not tobacco, but nicotine in low doses reverses Alzheimer's disease. And he's published paper after paper after paper ever since, showing that low dose pharmaceutical nicotine is a cognitive enhancer and a life extension agent. Just Google Dave Asprey human upgrade nicotine or Dr. Nicotine, and you'll find the episode. And like this guy's totally into it. And he says this beautiful picture of what this one molecule can do. The evidence is very strong. Do I use a few milligrams of pharmaceutically extracted nicotine most days because I'm far less likely to get Alzheimer's or Parkinson's? And because it's a great cognitive enhancer? I do. It's also an exercise mimetic. So he's an example of someone who's spent 30 years in the trenches doing the work. And what we have in academia is a lot of scientists who've done great work, but it's just breaking down now. If you write a book for lay people and you're a real academic, you're a sellout. Like, how dare you write something that people can read? You don't even have enough Latin words, and you use entire passive voice and complex sentences to obfuscate the meaning of your words and to make your research sound really important. So academics will attack another academic who has the audacity to believe their work is worthy of being seen in the world. So then they write a book or they go on a podcast, right? But that's breaking down now. Where part of your job, if you're an inventor, if you invent something, you damn well better learn how to sell it and bring it to the world. Because if you invent something that sits in your closet, you didn't do anything. And if you're an academic and you discovered some amazing new pathway that really matters and you never tell anyone about it because you're afraid someone will criticize you, your research doesn't matter. So your job is to become a master and then to share your knowledge with the world and be curious about it so others can help you evolve your work. And the more they know about your work, the more they're going to tell you that one thing you didn't know.
Something you did there when you were talking about the nicotine. Now, I think this is really important to pick up on because when you're communicating something like that, there's nuance to it, right? You mentioned low dose. You mentioned it wasn't tobacco. You were careful about how you presented that information.
Very much.
Now, there are a lot of people out there, and we live in a world where if you, it's quite easy to sensationalize fact and content. And if I put out a podcast that said why smoking is good or why nicotine is good for you with no nuance, it's going to blow up, right? I think a good example of it. And I'm not trying to disrespect because I've interviewed Dr. Stephen Gundry on this podcast before.
Oh,
when
he's a great friend.
When he was on, what was his name? Dr. Mike's podcast. He said something like, if you're eating grapes, you might as well be eating a Hershey's bar because, and I can't remember
It's because of the effect on blood sugar.
Okay, yeah. But obviously, people like yourself, people like him understand what he's saying. But if you communicate that to the everyday person on the street, they're going to get a sort of bad idea of what that information represents. And they're thinking, oh, great, I might as well just eat chocolate all day then. There's got to be nuance when you're dealing with information like this. Would you agree?
There has to be nuance. And one of the challenges that we have is that just like in the realm of politics, people who are looking to sensationalize or even people who are bad actors, they will take a quote out of context. They'll cut off half a sentence and they'll put it out there and say, see, this person said something, they're a bad person. And for people who are consuming content, It's entirely possible for someone to be 100% right on 7 things and 100% wrong on 3 things. And we have this weird polarization thinking. I think social media algorithms drive it, where you said that one thing, whether or not they really even said it. Therefore, I can't trust anything you say. That is a baby's view of looking at the world, because no one is right all the time and no one is wrong all the time. So you actually judge each idea on its own merit. And if you know that someone, and you actually know, not because you heard it in a takedown piece, but you actually know that someone's a liar because you have personal knowledge of it, then you discount what they say as being less likely to be true. But even a liar can tell a piece of information that's really useful. You just have to be curious all the time. And that's why I don't play the, take down this person, because even if it's a person who sensationalizes, they might say some really good things. They might say a lot of really bad things. What I would look out for is people who are trying to make their name known by taking down someone else. That's generally a sign that you're dealing with a narcissist. If you want to make your name known, you could say, this health expert said this thing, and I really don't agree with this thing. And here's the 10 reasons why this is the best approach for you. Okay, that's a reasonable thing. You're not saying they're a bad person. You're not talking about their mother. You're talking about their idea and saying, here's how I would evolve that, here's how I would change that, or here's why I don't think it's right. But it's not that the person was wrong or bad. It's that the idea was incorrect. And when we take it out of personalizing what is science, we end up in this world where you look at each idea on its merit, and then you quickly can see which are the people who have the most new ideas that have merit. And then you tune your antenna so you pay more attention to them because they're statistically more likely to have good ideas.
Another type of attack that I see a lot of you guys get directed your way, and this is probably a sign that the work that the person being attacked is doing is actually quite well. And a recent example of this is Dr. Andrew Huberman. There was a big hit piece. This was more of an attack on his personality, his personal relationships. I mean, if you want unbiased opinion about somebody or opinion you can trust, go into the ex-girlfriends probably isn't a good source of information. Yeah. But when you see these personal attacks, and there's plenty on people like Huberman, there's plenty on Bryan Johnson, and I'm sure you've probably experienced a few yourself. Do you take that as a sign of, oh, well, my work must be somewhat credible then if they come from my personality?
If they come after your personality, maybe you should look in the mirror and see if there's something to it.
Wow.
But if you've done the work and you have a therapist and you've done the personal development stuff, then what you do is you practice compassion. And you say, whoever's doing the takedown is probably got some issues. My experience after 20 years in the field, a lot of being in the public eye, almost every time there's a public hit piece, it's motivated by someone who's really, really angry and feeling like a victim. And some of what they say may be true. Almost never is all of what they say true. The thing about Andrew Huberman that was pretty damning was that the reporter, and I have no idea who the reporter is or if there was an agenda or if someone fed them information because they had a bone to pick. Like there's probably some of that going on, just statistically speaking. But they did find 5 different people, and they corroborated everything they could with different people, and they looked at physical evidence. That looked pretty convincing that there was one story being told publicly and another story happening privately. And look, I don't care how many girlfriends Andrew Huberman has. I have lots of friends with more than one girlfriend. It's pretty popular here in Austin. But what I wouldn't want to hear is someone saying publicly, I am monogamous and I have a dedicated girlfriend and they have 5 girlfriends, because that's an integrity issue. You don't want to lie. And the easiest thing you can ever do as a human being, and there's actually 2 studies on this that I'm aware of, is to practice 100% truthfulness. And I do my very best to do this. So if you were to ask me, Lewis, if you were to just say, Dave, can you pick me up at the airport tomorrow? I would say, I'm not going to pick you up tomorrow. I would not say I can't pick you up tomorrow. Because the reality is, I have enough money that if I pulled out all the stops and I blew up my calendar, I could pick you up. It's actually not true. Doesn't mean I'm going to tell you everything about my life. I have my private life. We all do. Doesn't mean that you're an open book. What it means is that if you say something, it damn well better be as truthful as you can make it with what you know at the time. And you always practice that. And it makes it really hard for people to attack you. I have a couple ex-employees who've made up all sorts of things, right? I have probably ex-investors, who knows? There's a lot of people who see themselves as victims, and those people will always come after others. And then even more, the biggest thing is just people who are bullied. I have so much fun online with bullies. They're like toys. So when someone comes down to a personal attack, it's the same thing as what we did in 6th grade, right? So I usually just respond, your mom. Right? And like, if we're gonna go there, like, let's just go there, right? And you do it with a smiley, and it's not a malicious thing, it's a funny thing. I did a video it was a funny video in the British Virgin Islands. I run a $100,000 mentorship group with some awesome entrepreneurs. And my girlfriend was there, and I said, guys, looking at the sunset's really good for your eyes. And I turned my camera around, and my girlfriend's standing there looking at the sunset in a bikini. And I said, I love a beautiful sunset. Okay. She was in the video. She stood there on purpose, and we both thought it was hilarious. And it was not at all cringy or using. So I post it, and 1% of people are just like, cringe. And so my response was, I think she's beautiful. Please don't talk about her body that way. Right? So look, some people, they're going to hate you because you exist, and you don't have to do it. A lot of people say, Dave, you look old. Like, here's the deal, man. I lost 100 pounds. Like, I have extra skin in my face because I'm 6% fat. I think I look better than I've ever looked in my life. There's shirts off pictures in Austin Local magazine from last month, and I've never been happier with how I look. So I could take that person and go, oh, or I just respond, that's not what your mom said. Done, right? This is entirely people acting childish. So we could also act childish, but not out of maliciousness, out of playfulness. And so I have great fun with trolls.
I like it. I like it a lot, man. And if I ever visit Austin, I'm definitely not going to hit you up for a ride from the airport. Don't worry.
Well, if I tell you I'm going to be there, I'm going to be there. And
Well,
if I can't make it at the last minute, there's going to be an Uber waiting for you, or a guy with a card with your name on it, because that's what integrity looks like.
I love it. I love it. We mentioned him in passing here. You talked about Bryan Johnson. You said your numbers are quite similar, actually, which is really interesting. He's obviously risen to be one of the biggest names in the sort of longevity space, and he's put out there that, I know you said 180. He's put out there about living to 200 years old, and
Well, yeah. What I appreciate about Bryan is, so in 2018 I launched Superhuman, which is my longevity book, and there's a media playbook. His media playbook and mine, they're identical, right? So there's things you do to get people to talk about the longevity movement, and he's executing it masterfully. Like, I don't know who his PR people are. They're great, right? And I want every national TV show talking about, there's these people out there who are extending their lives, because the more of us that believe it's possible, the more of us will start doing it. Just like, the 4-minute mile can be crushed, and as soon as one person did it, the next year 3 people did it. So we need Bryan. We need emerging influencers in longevity talking about what they're doing. And so that's a good thing. And how do you get media attention? Well, there was the time that I, on stage at my conference, played the video of having stem cells injected in my penis without actually looking at the penis, because that would be unseeable, or something you couldn't unsee. So, and I've gone through the whole range of, on social media, here's penis enhancement techniques, here's hair enhancement techniques, here's how you lose weight, here's how you anti-age your skin, right? So offering this information is of value to people. It's helpful. And where I'm a little bit tentative is that I have never published the complete list of what Dave takes every morning, partly because it changes most mornings, but also, why would you want to do what I do? I used to have autoimmune disease. I used to weigh 300 pounds. I am a 6'4" Northern European who flies 250 days of the year. I know my hormone levels. I'm on an aggressive longevity program. If you're a 120-pound Asian grandmother and you try to do what Dave does, you'll probably get disaster pants. It's not the outcome you want. So publishing a protocol so you can do what I do, I would have done that when I was 3 years into the longevity movement. Like, here's what everyone should do. But that was in my 20s. With the experience and the wisdom that I have, I'm launching an AI tool for people at my conference that says, based on all of this, here's what you should do because your goals are different than mine, your biology is different than mine, and your current state is different than mine. So given those things, let's take the sum of knowledge we have about biohacking and let's guide you on what to do that's cheapest and fastest and how to measure it, which lab tests do you need. So then you save a ton of money and you don't have to learn all of the stuff. But I would never have the hubris to say everyone should do what I do. I would be willing to say, you know what? If your vitamin D levels are low, you're probably not going to get results from a lot of things you're trying. So you got to raise your vitamin D levels. Do you need 15,000 IUs of vitamin D like I do? No, I have a weird genetic thing, so I need more vitamin D than you do. You probably need 5,000, but let's test it. That's a healthy approach to longevity. But everyone do this because I did it. I think that's kind of scary. And so I've never endorsed that approach. But what I can say is everyone, intermittent fasting is a great tool. You shouldn't overdo it. And the amount of intermittent fasting you need is based on your current state. So here's how to use intermittent fasting as a tool. Hey everyone, long-term ketosis is bad for you. Here's how to do cyclical ketosis with the right fats in order to get these results. But you don't have to do ketosis all the time, just do it some of the time. So it's, here's a tool and here's how to use the tool, but not everyone should use the same tool. Like if I need a chainsaw and you have a lawnmower, you're like, well, Dave has a chainsaw, I'm gonna use a chainsaw. It's not logical. We all have different things that we can address first to live a long time or just feel better.
Don't get me wrong. We could probably talk about this next topic. We could do a whole podcast on it. So I am sorry if there's only a few minutes left for you to answer this.
It's
But
all good.
it's around the idea of IQ because there is a lot of messaging put out there, especially from the academic world, that IQ is something that you can't really have influence over. I mean, there's some pretty massive books being written. I think the most notorious one's called the Bell Curve, which suggests that IQ is pretty much all based on genetics. In your experience, what is your hard evidence that Dave Asprey was able to have direct influence over raising his IQ by a significant amount of points?
Well, do you know who Dr. Daniel Amen is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
About 20 something years ago, his first book really changed my view of my brain. Oh, that's something I can hack. Today I'm in his board of directors. And he's run IQ tests on countless, probably more than 100,000 people. And he has brain scans called a SPECT scan of almost 600,000 people. So one of the biggest databases of brains out there. When I interviewed him from my documentary on toxic mold, before I really knew him well, we talked about exactly this. And he just laughed and he said, oh, toxic mold will knock at least 15 points off your IQ. You want to raise your IQ by 15 points, remove the toxins. It's pretty credible that way. And you can Google modafinil and IQ. And you can look at the various studies of neurofeedback and IQ and see that neurofeedback does raise IQ in studies. In fact, I run a neurofeedback clinic. I've run one for 11 years. I have 4 patents in neuroscience and manufacture my own EEG equipment. But probably the lowest hanging fruit for raising IQ is to increase your working memory. And studies do show that increasing working memory increases IQ. So how would you go about increasing your working memory? You would do something called a dual NBAC test, or not test, dual NBAC training. Dual NBAC training is free on your iPhone. You don't need to pay for apps. It's just the most uncomfortable, annoying, feel like a failure training that I know of. I'd rather sit in an ice bath for 10 minutes, which is too long every day, than do this. And I did it though, in my early 30s. And what you do is you play this dumb, unsatisfying game where you almost always fail. If you want an engaging game, you fail 15% of the time and then you progress. This one, you fail like 80, 90% of the time, but you keep doing it. And after about 2 or 3 weeks, one day you wake up and you can do the game because your brain got so pissed off so many times that it grows your working memory. It doubles your working memory. So right now, if you could remember 7 phone numbers, if you've successfully done the training recently, you can remember 7 phone numbers over here and 7 letters over here in order. And when I first did the training, I wouldn't try to do that right now because I probably should redo the training. But when I first went through that, it was like a superpower. I remember I was sitting at a family meal and there's more than a dozen people, and I took everyone's order in my head. And I just remember going, I've never been able to do this in my entire life. Like, what just happened? Well, the studies are very strong of working memory and IQ. The average person who completes, I believe it's 20 days of training in this, gets about 12 IQ points. So you could tell me it's impossible, but I'll just refer you back to the video on my Instagram page of all of these people saying, oh, we will never fly. That was JP Morgan's banker a year before we flew. And Einstein saying, we will never harness the splitting of the atom for energy 5 years before we did, right? Or Peter Attia saying, I'm a longevity doctor, but you cannot extend human life, right? How do you know we can't do it? I just provided a bunch of examples of where it is done, right? And if you don't believe me, get shitty drunk tonight, wake up tomorrow and take an IQ test, and then get a good night's sleep and wake up the next morning and take a different IQ test so you don't get a training effect. Because if you take the same test twice, you'll always score higher. Or better yet, do it the other way around to give you an unfair advantage. Take an IQ test after a good night's sleep, then get shitty drunk and take it again, and your scores will go down instead of up the way they should when you retake the test. How could you enhance your IQ? Don't get shitty drunk. Did you raise your IQ? Well, arguably.
And those quotes, that's a perfect way to sort of wrap up the spirit of the conversation we've had today. So thank you so much for the energy you've brought and the good spirit in which this conversation has been carried out. I appreciate the questions may be a little bit different from normal, but I don't like it when you listen to someone on a podcast. I could sit here and ask you, Dave, tell me your top 5 superfoods. Tell me your morning routine. You've probably done that a million times. So
I actually appreciate your questions. This is a fun conversation for me. I can teach all day long, but man, all this stuff is free on my site.
Exactly.
So this is way more fun. Your questions are well thought out, and they're not always easy questions. Some people get really reactive. Your questions are curious. They're not attack questions. I've had some of those before, and if you wanted to, you could edit my words down to make me sound like a total jerk. And I respect your right to do that. I just don't think you will.
No, certainly not, my friend. So let's let everyone listening and watching now who's enjoyed this good-spirited conversation. Where can we point these people to? Biohackingconference.com. Where else can we send them? Danger Coffee, your social media channels. Let these people know.
All right. Instagram, dave.asprey. Podcast is The Human Upgrade, 400 million downloads and counting. DaveAsprey.com is the hub for everything. And if you'd like to try coffee that makes you feel really, really good, that is truly free of mold toxins and has a therapeutic dose of trace minerals and electrolytes, that is dangercoffee.com.
And I can attest, I had the medium blend today. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I'll be going on to the darker stuff tomorrow. So I'll let everyone know how I get on. But yeah, Dave, thank you so much again. I'll link all that in the show notes below. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Hope we get to do this again, my friend. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed that video, please subscribe to the Freedom Pack channel and consider clicking here to watch another video that I think you'll enjoy.